The jungle was alive with strange sounds, every leaf moving as if it hid a secret. Ethan pushed carefully through the thick vines, his boots sinking into the damp ground. He was alone on this planet, far away from the colony, searching for rare herbs that could heal burns. His rifle was slung over his shoulder, not for hunting, but for protection. The jungle here was known to swallow men whole. Giant insects, snake-like beasts, and shadows that moved faster than the eye could follow. He had learned to listen, to move slow, and to never ignore the feeling of eyes watching him. That day, however, the silence became heavy, broken only by the sound of his own breathing. He stopped when he saw movement ahead. At first, he thought it was another beast, maybe a predator crouching low in the grass. But then the figure stepped into the light, breaking through the canopy, and his heart froze. It was not an animal. It was a girl. Her skin shimmered faintly, patterned with natural markings that looked almost like glowing paint. Her long hair was tangled with vines and leaves, her body completely unclothed, exposed to the harsh air of the jungle. She did not move like a beast. She stood still, her bright alien eyes locked on his. They held fear, but also curiosity. She was wild, but not broken. Ethan raised his hands slowly, palms out, showing he meant no harm. His voice was low, calm. "I won't hurt you." Of course, she could not understand the words, but tone was a language even the jungle spoke. Her head tilted, sharp and sudden, like a bird watching a stranger. She did not run. That alone told him something was wrong. Every wild creature here fled at the smell of humans. Why not her? His thoughts were broken by a sound in the dark, the low growl of something large. He glanced over his shoulder and saw glowing eyes between the trees. Predators, drawn by her scent. Or maybe his. The girl's chest rose fast, her breath trembling. Her hand reached out suddenly, clutching at his sleeve with desperate strength. She wanted his help. She had chosen him in that instant, a human stranger over the monsters of her jungle. Ethan pulled his rifle free. The creature stepped forward, shadows with long limbs and sharp teeth glinting in the green light. He fired a warning shot into the ground. The explosion of sound ripped through the jungle. Birds scattered in a frenzy, insects screamed, and even the beasts froze at the strange weapon. Smoke curled from the barrel. The girl gasped, eyes wide, watching the fire and thunder he held in his hands. She had never seen such a thing. To her, it was magic. The predators growled again, but then backed into the shadows, unwilling to face something they did not understand. The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan lowered the rifle slowly. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, but he was alive, and so was she. The girl still held his sleeve, knuckles white, her body trembling. When he looked at her face, he saw no shame about her state, only fear mixed with awe. Her lips parted, but no words came, only a soft sound, broken, unsure. Ethan sighed and pulled off his jacket. He held it out. For a moment she only stared, not understanding. Then he stepped closer and gently placed it around her shoulders. Her fingers touched the cloth, feeling the strange texture. Her eyes lifted to his again, wide and shining. She pulled the jacket close to her chest like it was the first warm thing she had ever known. She looked smaller now, less wild, more like someone lost rather than someone dangerous. They stood in silence, surrounded by the breath of the jungle. Ethan knew he could not leave her here. She would not survive another night. Her ribs showed under her skin, her feet were cut, and the marks on her arms told him she had been running for days. She belonged to no tribe, no family. She was alone. And now, by some strange twist of fate, she was his responsibility. The girl pointed toward the deeper jungle, then back to him, her hand pressing against his chest. It was not words, but the meaning was clear. She wanted to go with him. Ethan's mind screamed at the danger. Bringing her out could cause problems with the colony, with the authorities. But when her fingers curled around his hand, fragile but firm, his doubts faded. She had no one else. And he could not walk away. Not now. The jungle stirred again, the faint sound of something moving in the distance. The girl flinched and pressed against him, fear shaking her body. Ethan raised his rifle once more, scanning the trees, his senses sharp. Nothing came out. Not yet. But the message was clear. The jungle wanted her back. It would not let her go easily. He pulled her close and whispered, "You're safe with me." She could not understand, but the tone was enough. She nodded once, slow, her eyes never leaving his. Her trust was heavy, almost too much to carry. But Ethan squared his shoulders and started walking, guiding her through the thick vines. She followed without hesitation, clutching his jacket around her body, her bare feet silent on the earth. Behind them, the jungle watched with hungry eyes. Somewhere deep in the shadows, the predators growled again, waiting for another chance. Ethan knew he had taken more than just a girl from the wild. He had stolen something from the jungle itself. And the jungle never forgot. The night air was heavy, filled with the smell of damp leaves and old earth. Ethan led the girl slowly through the undergrowth, his hand tight around his rifle, his ears alert to every sound. She walked close beside him, barefoot and silent, her wide alien eyes darting at every shadow. Every time a branch cracked or a leaf brushed against them, she flinched, clutching his sleeve as though he was her only shield against the darkness. Ethan could feel her fear like a living thing, but what surprised him most was her trust. She had no reason to believe in him, a stranger, yet she held on to him as if he were her last chance. They stopped at a fallen log, and Ethan gestured for her to sit. She lowered herself carefully, still clutching the human jacket wrapped around her thin frame. He searched through his pack and pulled out a ration bar. He unwrapped it, broke it in half, and offered it to her. She hesitated at first, sniffing the strange food, her nose wrinkling at the unfamiliar smell. Then, slowly, she took a small bite. Her eyes widened, and in moments, she ate the rest quickly, her hunger clear. Ethan handed her the second piece, and she devoured that too, her hands trembling. For the first time, he saw her relax just a little, her face softening into something almost like relief. He wanted to ask questions, but words were useless. She didn't understand his language, and he didn't know hers. Still, her eyes spoke enough. She pointed toward herself, then made a sweeping gesture out into the dark jungle. Her head lowered and her shoulders shook. Ethan understood. She had been abandoned, left alone to die in this wilderness. His chest tightened. Whoever she was, her own people had cast her out. Now she was with him, and if he left her, she wouldn't survive another day. He took a deep breath and placed his hand over his chest. "Ethan," he said clearly, slowly. She blinked, tilting her head like she was trying to copy the sound. Tan. Her voice was soft, broken, but the attempt made him smile. Then she touched her chest lightly, whispering something in her own tongue. The word was short and flowing, something he could not repeat easily. He tried anyway, and she laughed, a tiny, surprising sound that carried warmth in the cold night. That laugh cut through the silence like sunlight breaking through clouds. For a moment, she wasn't just a wild girl. She was someone who wanted to belong. The jungle answered back with a distant roar. Ethan stiffened. He knew the sound well. Predators were circling again. He stood quickly, scanning the trees, then turned back to her. She was frozen, her hands clutching his jacket tighter. Without thinking, he reached down and took her hand. "It's okay," he said softly, though his own nerves were on fire. She gripped his hand harder, her trust stronger than her fear. That single gesture, that need for protection, made his decision for him. He couldn't abandon her. He couldn't leave her as prey. They moved again, heading toward higher ground where he had left his small camp. The path was rough, the jungle thick, but she followed without complaint. When she stumbled on a root and cut her foot, she bit down on her lip, refusing to cry out. Ethan crouched, checking the wound, but she pulled her leg back quickly, shaking her head. Pride was written across her face. She didn't want him to see her weak. Still, he tore a strip from his undershirt and tied it around her foot, ignoring her protests. She stared at him in silence afterward, her eyes softer now, almost shining. She wasn't used to kindness. That much was clear. When they finally reached his camp, a small clearing with a fire pit and a rough shelter of metal sheets, she stopped at the edge, staring. The fire's glow flickered across her skin, and she stepped closer slowly, like she was approaching a sacred thing. She extended her hands toward the warmth, her lips parting in wonder. Ethan watched her carefully. She looked fragile in the firelight, wrapped in his oversized jacket, her hair wild, her skin still marked with dirt and scratches. Yet there was a strange dignity in her, something untouched despite her suffering. Ethan handed her a blanket and gestured for her to lie down inside the shelter. She obeyed, curling up on the ground, but her eyes stayed fixed on him. He sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle, pretending not to notice. but he felt her gaze, steady and unblinking, as though she was trying to memorize every detail of him. At last, she whispered something again, her voice almost like a prayer. He didn't understand, but the tone was clear. It was gratitude. The fire crackled, the night grew colder, and distant howls echoed through the jungle. Ethan's muscles ached, his mind heavy with questions. Who was she? Why had her people cast her away? And why, after only a few hours, did he feel so responsible for her? He glanced at her one more time. She had closed her eyes, finally drifting into sleep, her hand still clutching the edge of his jacket tightly, as if afraid he would vanish. Ethan leaned back against a tree and let out a slow breath. He had made a silent promise in his heart. No matter what it cost him, he would protect her. Tomorrow, he would have to find food, clothes, and a way to get her away from this cursed jungle. She had been abandoned once, but he would not abandon her again. She had chosen to trust him, and that meant something. It meant everything. Somewhere deep inside, Ethan already knew. His life had changed the moment she reached for his sleeve, and there was no going back. The transport ship shook slightly as it left the atmosphere, its engines humming through the metal floor. Ethan sat near the back, watching the alien girl who now sat wrapped in his spare blanket. Her eyes were wide as she looked at the glowing panels, blinking lights, and the humans moving around. Every sound made her twitch. Every passing person made her grip the blanket tighter. She had never seen anything like this before, and it showed on her face. The jungle had been her cage, but this was a whole different world. Ethan leaned closer and whispered, "It's okay. You're safe." She didn't understand the words, but she looked at him and nodded slowly, as if trusting the calm in his voice. One of the crewmen, a tall man with sharp eyes, stopped when he noticed her. He frowned, whispering to another. Their eyes lingered too long, judgment clear on their faces. "Where did he find her?" one muttered. "Wild girl, probably dangerous." Ethan heard them, but ignored it, focusing only on her. The girl reached out suddenly, touching a panel that lit up under her fingers. She gasped and pulled back quickly, then looked at Ethan with wide, shining eyes. He smiled and shook his head gently, showing her it was safe. She tried again, pressing the button softly, and when the light responded, she laughed, a pure sound that made other passengers turn their heads. For her, this was all magic, and she was like a child discovering fire for the first time. But not everyone saw her innocence. A woman across the cabin leaned to her companion and whispered loudly enough for Ethan to hear, "Savages! They shouldn't be brought here." Another chuckled, adding, "He'll regret this. She's trouble." Ethan's jaw tightened. He placed an arm around the girl's shoulders, pulling her a little closer, making his stance clear. She belonged under his protection now, no matter what others thought. When the ship finally docked at the colony station, the girl froze. The sight of huge doors opening, metallic corridors stretching endlessly, and hundreds of humans walking briskly in uniforms overwhelmed her. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself and stepped close behind Ethan, almost hiding in his shadow. People stared as they passed, some with curiosity, some with disgust, and some with open mockery. Whispers followed them like ghosts. Look at her. Not even clothed properly. Why bring her here? Ethan ignored them all, though his fists clenched at his sides. They entered the main hall, where bright screens flashed news, holograms floated above, and voices echoed in every direction. The girl's head moved constantly, eyes darting, trying to take it all in. She stumbled into a group of workers carrying tools, and they snapped at her, calling her primitive. She backed away quickly, bumping into Ethan. Her breathing quickened, panic rising. Ethan crouched slightly, placing both hands on her shoulders. "Hey, look at me." She looked into his eyes, her chest still heaving. "It's fine. Just stay with me." She didn't know his words, but she calmed when she saw his steady face. He guided her to a quieter corner, away from the rush of people. She crouched on the floor there, touching the smooth tiles, then pressing her hand against the glass wall that showed the stars outside. Her mouth fell open in awe. For someone who had only seen trees, dirt, and predators, the endless stretch of stars was something holy. She whispered in her own language, soft and trembling, as though speaking to the universe itself. Ethan watched her silently. For a moment, her face glowed with wonder, not fear. But peace never lasted long. 2 uniformed officers approached, their eyes hard. "Ethan Cross?" one asked sharply. "Yes," Ethan replied, standing tall. The man's gaze shifted to the girl. This is unauthorized. She's not registered, not cleared, not even civilized. You can't just bring a stray into the colony. The word stray cut deep. The girl didn't understand, but she felt the tension, shrinking back against the wall. Ethan stepped in front of her, shielding her. She's under my protection, he said firmly. The officer sneered. Your protection doesn't change the law. If command hears of this, she'll be taken, probably sent to a containment unit. You know what happens then. Ethan's fists tightened. He knew exactly what that meant. She would be locked away, studied like an animal, treated as nothing more than a problem to solve. His stomach turned at the thought. She's not going anywhere, Ethan said, his voice low but steady. The officer glared, but after a tense moment, he backed off with a warning. We'll be watching. Don't make us regret letting you walk. The men left, but the shadow of their threat lingered. The girl tugged gently at Ethan's sleeve, her eyes searching his. She didn't know what had been said, but she sensed the danger. Stay. You? She whispered, her broken attempt at his language. Ethan's chest tightened. She had picked up those words already, clinging to them like lifelines. He smiled faintly and nodded. Yes, stay. That night, he brought her to his quarters. It was small, just a bed, a desk, and a few shelves. But to her, it was another universe. She touched every object with reverence. The lamp that glowed without fire, the books stacked on the shelf, the mirror that showed her own reflection clearly. She stared into the mirror for a long time, as though meeting herself for the first time. Her hands touched her face, her hair, her body, as if trying to understand who she was now. Then, slowly, she laughed again, that same innocent laugh that filled the room with warmth. Ethan leaned against the wall, watching her. She was fragile and wild, but there was strength in her too, a will to live, a heart that still found joy in small things despite everything she had suffered. The colony might see her as nothing, but he saw more. She wasn't a burden. She was someone who deserved a chance, someone worth fighting for. When she finally curled up in the blanket on the floor, her eyes still on him, Ethan sat at the desk, his mind heavy. He knew things would get harder from here. The authorities would not stay silent. People would keep judging. And the predators of the jungle were not the only threats. Men could be worse. But when she whispered his name softly before falling asleep, Tan, he felt the weight of his promise. He would protect her, no matter what. And whatever storms came next, they would face them together. The morning light slipped through the window, touching her face as she sat on the floor wrapped in Ethan's old blanket. She looked at him with wide eyes, her hair still tangled and her skin marked from the jungle. Ethan studied her for a long moment, realizing she couldn't live like this anymore. She needed clothes, food, and the simple dignity of being seen as more than a wild creature. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. Taking her out into the colony streets was dangerous. People stared even when she was wrapped in his blanket. And authorities were already watching. But keeping her hidden forever wasn't an option. She deserved better. He finally said quietly, "We're going shopping," even though she couldn't understand the words. When they stepped outside, the colony was buzzing with life. Hover carts zipped past, vendors shouted about their goods, and children ran between stalls. The girl froze, her bare feet hovering on the clean walkway as if afraid to step on it. Ethan gave her an encouraging nod and reached out his hand. After a hesitant moment, she took it, clutching his palm tightly. Together, they walked into the market. Heads turned instantly. Some people laughed softly, some sneered, and others whispered behind their hands. The girl lowered her head, hiding behind her tangled hair, but Ethan kept walking, his jaw tight. The first shop they entered was a clothing stall with long racks of dresses, tunics, and boots. The girl's eyes widened as she touched the fabrics, silk, leather, synthetic blends. Her fingers lingered on a pale blue dress, soft and flowing. Ethan picked it up and held it against her, nodding with a small smile. She tilted her head, confused, until she noticed a mirror nearby. When she saw her reflection with the dress held over her body, her lips parted in shock. She touched the mirror, then the fabric, then looked at him with something between wonder and disbelief. "Try it," Ethan encouraged, gesturing toward the changing screen. She frowned, clearly not understanding, so he gently guided her behind it, passing the dress through. A few minutes later, she stepped out. The dress was too big, hanging loose on her thin frame, but in that moment, she looked transformed. Her wildness softened, her skin glowing under the clean fabric. She stood stiff, uncertain, as if expecting laughter. Ethan clapped softly and gave her a nod. Perfect. For the first time since he had met her, she smiled, small, hesitant, but real. She turned toward the mirror, twirling awkwardly, the dress swaying around her legs. Her laughter rang out suddenly, high and clear. Other shoppers stopped and stared, but now some of them smiled too, seeing her not as a savage, but as a girl discovering herself. They tried on more clothes, shirts, jackets, simple trousers. She laughed at the strange shoes, stumbling as she tried them, then grinning when she managed a steady step. Ethan bought a few sets, ignoring the glares of those who thought she didn't belong. She carried the bag herself, holding it tightly as if it were treasure. After clothes, Ethan took her through the food market. The smells overwhelmed her: spices, roasted meat, fruits dripping with juice. She darted from stall to stall, pointing, touching, sometimes grabbing things she didn't recognize. Ethan laughed quietly, pulling her back gently each time. He bought her a small sweet bun, and when she bit into it, her eyes went wide, her mouth full, and then she laughed again, crumbs spilling down her chin. She looked at him like he had just given her the stars. For a little while, Ethan let himself relax, watching her explore. Her innocence drew the eyes of others, but he didn't care. She was happy, and that was all that mattered. But not everyone was just watching. Near the edge of the market, two men stood in the shadows. Their clothes marked them as traitors, but Ethan's instincts told him otherwise. Their eyes followed the girl, and their whispers were sharp. One of them smirked and nodded toward her. Unclaimed, Ethan heard faintly. Rare skin, wild blood, worth a fortune. The other licked his lips and replied, "Easy pick. He won't be able to guard her forever." Ethan's stomach turned cold. He knew their type, slavers who saw living beings as property. He placed a protective hand on the girl's shoulder and steered her toward another stall. But his eyes kept flicking back to the shadows, watching the men. They were pretending to shop now, but their focus never shifted away from her. The girl noticed his tension and tugged his sleeve gently. "Etan?" she whispered, trying his name again. Her eyes searched his face. He forced a smile. "It's fine," he lied, though his grip tightened on her shoulder. They reached a stall selling scarves, and she lifted one, bright red with golden threads. She wrapped it clumsily around her neck, then looked at him expectantly. "Pretty," Ethan said with a nod, and she beamed, delighted at the single word she understood. She reached into the bag and carefully folded it beside her new clothes, hugging the bundle like it was life itself. But the men in the shadows had moved closer now. One brushed past intentionally, his hand almost grazing the girl's arm. She flinched, stepping back against Ethan. Anger surged through him, hot and sharp. He locked eyes with the man and spoke in a low voice. "Touch her, and you'll lose the hand." The man smirked but didn't argue, slipping back into the crowd. Still, Ethan knew it wasn't over. As they left the market, the girl walked beside him proudly in her new clothes, her scarf bright against her skin. She didn't notice the danger that had passed so close. To her, it was a day of discovery, of joy, of learning she could be something other than a castaway. But to Ethan, it was a warning. People would not see her innocence. They would see profit. And that meant the fight to protect her had only just begun. That night, when they returned to his quarters, she placed her bag of clothes neatly on the floor, then sat cross-legged beside it, smiling at him. She touched her scarf, then touched his chest, whispering again, "Stay. You?" Ethan swallowed hard, his heart heavy but steady. "Yes, always." Outside, unseen in the colony's alleys, the traders whispered their plans. She had caught their eye, and they would not let her go so easily. The night was quiet, but Ethan knew it was the kind of quiet that came before danger. He had not slept in 2 days, always keeping the rifle close, always listening for the sound of boots outside the door. The girl lay near him, curled up in her blanket, her breathing soft but uneven. She did not rest deeply anymore. Every creak, every whisper of the wind made her twitch awake. Ethan hated that. She deserved peace, but this colony and the slavers that followed them would never allow it. The first sign came with the faint crunch of gravel outside. Ethan's eyes opened instantly. He raised his hand, motioning the girl to stay low. She sat up, her scarf slipping from her shoulders, her eyes wide in fear. A shadow passed across the small window, then another. They were surrounded. His chest tightened. This was no longer a warning. This was the attack. The door rattled violently, then slammed open with a loud crash. Two men rushed in, their faces half covered, weapons in their hands. The girl screamed, scrambling back against the wall. Ethan lifted his rifle and fired. The first man dropped instantly, his weapon clattering across the floor. The second lunged forward, but Ethan swung the rifle like a club, slamming the butt into the man's jaw. The intruder fell, groaning. But more came. 4, maybe 5, their boots thundering in the hallway. Ethan shouted, "Stay behind me!" even though she only understood part of his words. Still, she obeyed, crawling close, her hands trembling. He fired again, the blast lighting the room in flashes of fire. A man fell, another cursed, and the others ducked for cover. Bullets slammed into the walls, shards of metal flying. The girl's hands clutched Ethan's arm, but then something changed in her eyes. She glanced at the window, then at the floor, then back at him. It was as if instinct awoke inside her, the instinct of someone who had survived the jungle alone. She grabbed a loose stone from the corner, aimed carefully, and hurled it. The rock struck one of the men in the forehead, dropping him with a cry. Ethan looked at her, shocked, but she was already moving again, tossing another at the lights, plunging half the room into shadow. "Good," Ethan muttered, firing into the confusion. He had underestimated her. She wasn't helpless. She was fighting beside him. The attackers fell back for a moment, regrouping in the hallway. Ethan grabbed the girl's wrist. "We move. Now!" He kicked open the back exit and pulled her into the dark alleys of the colony. They ran, boots slamming against the ground, breaths coming fast. Behind them, shouts echoed, "Catch them! Don't let them escape!" The streets were mostly empty at night, but danger lurked everywhere. Ethan guided her through narrow passages, ducking behind crates and walls. The girl followed closely, her scarf trailing behind, her eyes sharp. She knew how to move quietly, how to blend into shadows. She was using the same skills that had kept her alive in the jungle. Together, they slipped past patrols and avoided capture. At one point, they crouched behind a stack of barrels as 2 slavers passed inches away. The girl held her breath, her fingers gripping Ethan's hand so tightly it almost hurt. He squeezed back, calming her. When the men were gone, she exhaled shakily, whispering, "Safe?" He nodded. "Not yet, but we will be." They reached the edge of the colony where abandoned warehouses stood. Ethan pushed open a rusty door and guided her inside. The place was dark, filled with broken machinery and dust. For the moment, it was safe. The girl sank to the floor, exhausted, her body trembling. Ethan leaned against the wall, breathing hard, his rifle across his knees. For a long time, neither spoke. The only sound was their ragged breathing. Then the girl lifted her head. She pointed at her chest, then at him, her voice shaky but determined. "Together." It was the second time she had said that word to him, but this time it carried more weight. She had fought beside him, risked her life, and now she wanted him to know she was not afraid anymore. Ethan stared at her, the corner of his mouth lifting into a tired smile. Yes, together. They spent the rest of the night in that warehouse, listening for footsteps, but none came. The girl dozed against his shoulder, her hair brushing his arm, her face peaceful despite everything. Ethan stayed awake, his mind racing. He thought about how quickly things had changed. A week ago, he had been alone, wandering the jungle for medicine. Now he was running for his life with an alien girl who depended on him completely. But she wasn't just a burden. Tonight had proved it. She was strong, clever, and brave. She had saved him as much as he had saved her. When dawn crept through the broken windows, Ethan knew they could not stay hidden forever. The slavers would search every street, every building. The colony itself had become a cage. But as he looked down at her sleeping face, he felt something new inside him. Not just duty, not just protection, something deeper, a bond that was already unbreakable. She stirred in her sleep, whispering softly in her own language, words he couldn't understand. But then she said his name, Ehtan, as if it was part of her dream. He closed his eyes, listening, and tightened his grip on the rifle. No matter what came next, he would fight. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. She had been abandoned once, but not again, not while he was alive. And he would make sure she knew that every single day. Outside, the colony woke with the rising sun, unaware of the silent promise made inside that warehouse. The promise that whatever storm was coming, they would face it side by side. The market was still in Ethan's mind long after they left. He had seen the way those men looked at her, like hunters watching prey. Even back in his quarters, he could not shake the feeling that they were being watched. The girl, however, seemed happier than ever. She sat on the floor with her new clothes spread around her like treasures, touching each one gently, smiling to herself. When she noticed Ethan's serious face, she crawled closer and tugged his sleeve softly. "Safe?" she whispered, using one of the few words she had learned. He forced a smile and nodded. Safe. But deep inside, he knew danger was not far. That evening, Ethan cooked a simple meal. The smell filled the small room, and she sniffed the air eagerly. When he handed her a plate, she ate clumsily at first, then faster, her hunger still raw from her time in the jungle. But she slowed when she noticed him watching. She offered him the last piece from her plate, her hand shaking. Ethan's chest tightened at the gesture. Even with so little, she wanted to share. He pushed it back to her gently. "Yours?" he said. She smiled shyly, then ate it, eyes never leaving his. Later, as darkness settled outside, Ethan checked the locks twice. The colony was not a safe place for her. Slavers had eyes everywhere, and he had already drawn too much attention. He pulled out his rifle, placing it within reach before lying down. The girl curled up near the bed, wrapped in her scarf like it was armor. For a while, there was peace. The sound of her breathing softened the edges of his fear. But in the dead of night, a faint creak broke the silence. Ethan's eyes snapped open. His instincts screamed danger. He stayed still, listening. Another sound followed, the soft scrape of metal on metal. Someone was at the door. His hand slid to his rifle. The girl stirred in her sleep, sensing something wrong. When the door handle rattled, she jolted awake, clutching his blanket tightly. Her eyes were wide with terror as she whispered, "Etan?" He pressed a finger to his lips, motioning for silence. The handle turned again, this time harder. A low laugh echoed outside, followed by a whisper in a language Ethan didn't need to understand. He knew it was them, the men from the market. They had tracked her here. The girl grabbed his arm with both hands, trembling violently. She didn't need to speak. Her fear said everything. Ethan's blood boiled. He moved silently, setting up his rifle, pointing it toward the door. The lock clicked suddenly, metal breaking. The door creaked open a crack. A hand reached in, pulling at the frame. Ethan fired a single shot, the blast tearing through the silence. The bullet hit the wall inches from the intruder's hand. The men cursed and stumbled back into the hall. Ethan stood, his voice low but full of iron. "Come through that door again, and I'll put the next one between your eyes." Footsteps retreated quickly, fading into silence. For now, they were gone. But Ethan knew they would be back. The girl was shaking so hard she could barely breathe. Ethan crouched beside her, placing the rifle down and pulling her close. She buried her face against his chest, her hands gripping his shirt with desperate strength. "Safe? You?" she whispered again, her voice breaking. He held her tighter, whispering back, "Yes, safe with me." Even if he wasn't sure himself, he had to make her believe it. For the rest of the night, he didn't sleep. He sat against the wall with his rifle across his lap, keeping watch. The girl eventually drifted back into an uneasy sleep, her head resting against his side. Ethan stared at the door, every sense sharp, his mind already planning. He couldn't stay here. If they knew his quarters, they would return. Maybe with more men. Maybe with weapons. He needed to find a way to protect her, or get her far away from this place. When dawn came, the girl woke slowly, her eyes red from fear and little sleep. She looked at him, exhausted, then whispered another broken sentence. "Stay. Me?" The words were clumsy, but the meaning was clear. She wanted to know if he would leave her. Ethan brushed a strand of hair from her face and said softly, "I'm not leaving." She closed her eyes, relief washing over her. The day passed in tension. Ethan didn't take her outside. Instead, he taught her simple words, pointing at objects, table, food, clothes. She tried to repeat them, her voice uneven but eager. Each time she managed, she smiled proudly, and for a moment the shadow of fear lifted. He realized she was learning fast, driven by trust and a need to belong. But the danger never left his mind. That evening, while the girl was folding her clothes neatly into a corner, Ethan heard something outside again. Footsteps too slow, too careful. He stood, rifle in hand, and moved toward the window. In the alley below, two figures lingered in the shadows, watching his room. When he raised the rifle, they slipped away into the crowd. He cursed under his breath. They were patient. They were waiting for the right moment. And he knew it would come soon. He turned back to the girl, who was now watching him with worried eyes. She touched her chest lightly, then his, whispering, "Together." The single word carried more weight than anything he had ever heard. Ethan nodded, his voice low and steady. Together. He meant it with every fiber of his being. That night, he laid out a plan in his mind. He would not let them take her. If they came, he would fight. If they tried to separate them, he would run. She had been abandoned once before, left to die in a merciless jungle. But now, she had him. And Ethan Cross was not a man who broke his promises. The morning sun poured through the broken windows of the warehouse, painting long golden lines across the dusty floor. Ethan stretched his sore arms and looked down at the girl curled up against his side. Her breathing was steady now, calmer than it had been in days. For a moment, he allowed himself to just watch her. Her scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, her new clothes wrinkled but clean, her face soft in sleep. She no longer looked like the terrified creature he had first found in the jungle. She looked like someone beginning a new life, though danger still pressed against them like a shadow. When she stirred, blinking at the light, she looked up at him and gave a small smile. "Etan," she whispered, the sound still broken but filled with trust. He smiled back, brushing dirt from her cheek. "We need to move," he said softly, though he knew she understood only a little. She tilted her head, then nodded. She always seemed to understand his tone, if not his words. They left the warehouse carefully, moving through back alleys until they reached the quieter edge of the colony. Ethan had made a decision during the night. They couldn't run forever. If he kept hiding, she would never be free. He needed to give her a real life, not one of fear. That meant clothes, food, and safety, things she had been denied all her life. And that meant showing the world she was no longer just a wild girl from the jungle, but someone who had dignity, someone who had him. The first place they stopped was a small shop that sold jewelry and trinkets. The girl's eyes widened at the glittering stones displayed in glass cases. She pressed her nose close, her breath fogging the glass. Ethan chuckled. "You like that, huh?" She didn't understand, but when she turned to him, her smile said enough. He bought her a simple necklace, nothing grand, just a thin chain with a small silver charm. When he placed it around her neck, she touched it gently, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Then she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his chest for a brief moment, her way of saying thank you. As they walked through the streets, people still stared. Whispers followed them. Some were cruel, calling her savage, unworthy, or a burden. Others were curious, watching the strange pair move side by side. Ethan ignored them all. What mattered was that she walked with her head higher now. She no longer shrank from every glance. She held onto his arm proudly, her scarf bright against her skin, her necklace gleaming in the sun. But danger still lingered. In the corner of his eye, Ethan spotted one of the traders from the market watching them from across the street. His blood turned cold. He leaned down and whispered, "Stay close." She nodded instantly, gripping his arm tighter. They quickened their pace, weaving through the crowd until the man was gone. Ethan knew this wasn't the end, but he also knew he couldn't let fear control them anymore. By evening, he brought her back to his quarters. This time, she didn't sit on the floor. She carefully laid out her new clothes, then sat on the chair, looking almost like she belonged. She touched the necklace again and then reached for his hand. "Home," she whispered, her voice soft but clear. The words stunned him. He hadn't taught her that yet. She had learned it on her own, piecing it together from the way he spoke. She looked at him, her eyes shining, waiting for his answer. "Yes," Ethan said, his throat tight. "Home." The girl smiled, and for the first time, it was not the smile of someone lost or rescued. It was the smile of someone who had found where she belonged. She moved closer, wrapping his jacket around herself, as she always did, but this time she added something new. She placed her hand firmly on his chest, looking straight into his eyes. "Mine," she whispered. The word was simple, but her voice carried strength. It was not a question. It was a declaration. Ethan froze for a moment, his heart thundering. Then, slowly, he placed his own hand over hers. "Yours," he whispered back. That night, there were no footsteps outside, no rattling at the door, no shadows moving in the alleys. For the first time since the jungle, she slept peacefully, curled beside him on the bed instead of the floor. Ethan lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, realizing just how much his life had changed. He had found her by chance, but keeping her had been a choice he would make again and again, no matter what it cost him. In the days that followed, things began to shift. She learned more words, enough to say short sentences. Food, please. Thank you. Stay with me. She laughed more often, especially when trying on her clothes in front of the mirror, twirling until she grew dizzy. The colony still judged, the slavers still watched from shadows, but Ethan stood firm. Anyone who dared to come near her faced the silent warning of his rifle and the steel in his eyes. She was no longer the unclothed girl hiding in the jungle. She was no longer abandoned. She was his responsibility, his fight, his world. And though the galaxy might try to take her away, Ethan Cross had already decided he would carry her through every battle, every storm until the very end. One evening, as the stars filled the sky outside the window, she sat beside him, her hand in his, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. Together, she whispered. He looked at her, smiling faintly, his voice steady. Always. And in that single word, he sealed the promise he had made since the first day in the jungle, that she would never be alone again.